Welcome to the Suffolk Sewing Circle. Today we will be making this cute sock bunny out of a pair of men's crew socks and one women's athletic sock. This is a great project for the springtime, and we hope that you'll enjoy this intermediate lesson. This lesson will use a lot of hand sewing skills and will be a good addition to the collection of Suffolk Sewing Circle videos as it builds on skills that you've learned in previous lessons. Some things that we'll be adding to this tutorial that you haven't learned before with us is using a doll needle. This is going to be a different tool than we've used before, and so that'll be a new application of your hand sewing skills. Another thing that we'll be doing is using safety eyes and a safety nose, so that's going to be a new skill as well. So we're glad that you're here to join us today to make this cute plushie. This is, again, an intermediate lesson. Altogether, this project will take you a little bit longer than some of our previous ones. I would say set aside about 3 hours total for this project. It's also the kind of project you can work along as you go, so if you don't want to do it all in one sitting, you can take your time with it. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll get started. Okay, so to begin, I want to talk a little bit about the materials that you'll need. This is what you will receive in your kit if you got one from the library. And if you happen to be joining us from home, these are materials you could collect on your own. Pretty widely available either in local stores or online. So to make our sock bunny, we will need one pair of men's crew socks. You want the tall ones because we're going to use the full length of the sock for that. You'll need one women's athletic sock, the little ankle size. You'll need one thread that's going to match your main body part. If you have really different colored socks, you can always get matching threads for each. I found that it wasn't really necessary for this project, so I just used this one. You will need pink embroidery floss. This is going to be for the mouth of our bunny. You will need a ribbon for decoration. That's to tie around her neck when we're finished. Some specialty items that you'll need will include these safety eyes and noses. So this is an item that you may need to buy from an actual craft store or online. So for this, we will be using two black safety eyes, which come in two pieces. It's the eye part and this washer that goes on the back. For this project, I'm using 15mm eyes, and that measures the diameter across the eyes. For this project, I'm also using an 18mm nose. I chose a brown one for this. It also comes with a washer like that. You could choose to use buttons if you would prefer. That is going to be a slightly easier technique. I'm demonstrating this because safety eyes are preferable if you will be giving this toy to a young child, as these are designed not to be able to be pulled off by young children. It's also a good skill to have if you're interested in learning how to make dolls and stuffed animals. So we will be demonstrating the safety noses and eyes today. And then also you'll need something to mark your project with. So you're going to mark your pieces as you go. There isn't going to be a printed pattern for this one. This is an easy project to freehand. For that, I'm going to use a piece of chalk. You could use a marker. A fabric marker would be great. Whatever is going to show up on your sock there. I would caution not to use a Sharpie or something that bleeds a lot because you don't want it to mark through. You want something that's going to show up just on the back side of the project where we're working, and it won't show through once we turn it right side out. As far as one last thing you'll need is some Crafters fiber fill. So this is a large package. This is a 10-ounce pack. This is far more than I will need for this one project. I just wanted you to see the label that I have here. This particular package says ideal for doll making. Really any polyester type of filling would work fine, whatever brand you prefer. And this package that's 10 ounces says it will stuff at least one 10-inch doll, but honestly, it's probably going to be far more than we need for this project. As far as tools you'll need, I have here a doll needle. This is also, it would be fine to use a tapestry needle if you find that in a pack of upholstery needles, for example. You will need this longer, sturdier needle, though, for the work that we will be doing today. You will also need a small pair of embroidery snips, so I have those here. It may be handy to also have a seam ripper if you have one of those. I'll show you why we might use one or the other here in a moment. And also a sharp pair of sewing scissors. So those are going to be the supplies that you need, and I'll show you how to get started. So we're going to begin by using the 2 crew socks, and we're going to start by turning them wrong side out. And then the first step is going to be cutting open this seam at the top so that we have the full length of the sock. You can use a seam ripper for this step if you prefer. I'm going to use my snips. I find that's a little easier for something woven like this. So carefully just go along this seam here. Hopefully you can see that I have a couple of stitches there. I'm just going to snip them, and that's going to pull them right apart. It's a little bit hard to see with this dark color here, but hopefully you can see that that's just coming apart. So I'm going to snip a couple more stitches so you can see how it comes apart. And you can see that's opening right up. So the first step will be to go all the way around the top of both socks. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done this next step so that I can talk you through it a little bit easier, and hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. So the next step after you get your seams taken apart would be to lay your socks flat so that your heel of your sock is going to be sticking upright. Now, I have already cut off the heel of one of my socks, and I'm going to set this piece aside to be the tail of my bunny here in a minute here. So I just kind of used the change in color here where my stripes are. The heel of this sock was a solid color, so that made it easy to see where to cut. Just to show you on this sock, basically this little triangle part is what you're cutting out. Okay. The other thing I have gone ahead and done here is I have sketched on my lines. And so on the sock that we cut the heel out of, this is going to be our arms of our bunny. And so I've used my chalk, and you really have to kind of mark it hard to get your marks to work, but just making as straight as line as you can. You're going to basically draw a little hook here and then a little hook here. So it should be kind of a loop at the bottom, almost like a J or a U, I guess. And then on this one, I've done the exact same thing, except that I have made my lines go all the way up to the top of the heel. These are going to be our legs on this side, so they're going to be a little bit longer. And so the next step from here is I'm going to carefully try to use those lines to cut out my pieces, and then I'm going to stitch them together. So again, because it's a sketch, it's not going to be exact. Use it as a guide, but just be careful how you're cutting. Try to cut as straight of a line as you can. Okay, and then when I come down here to the bottom, I'm just going to turn it so I can see what I'm doing here. There we go. And so that is one piece that I'm going to use for an arm. Then I'll go back and I'll cut another piece. if I want to just be sure I got it about right, I can lay them on top of each other just to see that I have them shaped about the same. It looks like I mostly do. I'm just going to shape up my end piece here a little bit, just so I'm sure that my hands of my bunny look about the same. So you can kind of shape that up a little bit just to be sure that you sketched it nicely. So now we've cut out our 2 arm pieces. And just the same, I'm going to cut my leg pieces on this side, and then I'll show you how to sew them. Okay, so now we have our arms and our legs cut out, and as you can see, my leg pieces here are just a little bit longer than my arm pieces. So that's how it should turn out when you're finished. So now our task is going to be to sew around the bottom and up the side, leaving the opening at the top. And we're going to be doing that using a double thread, and I'll show you why that is in just a moment. And we're going to use a whip stitch. So I'm going to start it where my pieces are together. I'm going to zoom in so you can see really well. Okay, so this is the way it opens up. So basically I'm going to sew it into a 2 now. And I'm going to do that by anchoring to the fold here. So I'm going to put my needle through, and then to make sure it stays and doesn't pull through, because this is a really loose weave here with our sock. Hold on, let me even it out. There we go. I'm going to run my needle between my threads like this so that I can catch between them. And that way it won't pull through to the other side. So that's a way to make sure it's really secure. And then to double check that it's secure, I'm going to just knot it to make sure it doesn't come through. Like this. Okay. So now that I'm super sure that's not going to come apart, I can start my whip stitch. You want to put your stitches pretty close together so that no stuffing is going to come out. And you want to put it about that far from the edge. So you don't want it so close to the edge that it pulls through. You want to make sure that you're catching enough of your woven fabric there that it'll stay. All right. This is one step that you could do with a sewing machine if you prefer. I find that it's easier to do this by hand because sewing machines might tend to grab this kind of fabric with the presser foot a little bit. It can be hard to get your tension right so that it doesn't wad up your fabric while you're sewing. In my opinion, it's just easier to do this by hand. But to each their own. If you prefer to do it with your sewing machine, you certainly could. Okay. So that's essentially how the technique goes. So I'm just going to go all the way around, and then when I get up to the top, I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to go across because I need to leave this open so I can turn it right side out and also stuff it with fiber fill. So I'll show you what it looks like when we're finished. So now the next step is going to be to cut the ear pieces. And so we are going to use one of the toes of our crew socks as well as our athletic sock that we have. So our first step is to cut a piece of the athletic sock to match the crew sock. So I'm just going to snip that. And then the next thing that we're going to do is cut them around this way so that they become 2 pieces. So the way that I've arranged them is this is the way that the sock would go on if you were to put it on your foot. So I've laid it flat the other way, if that makes sense. So this is the bottom of the sock. The other thing is on my athletic sock, one thing I have to work around here is I have a brand name printed here, which I don't want on my bunny. So when I cut my sock open, I'm going to want to cheat and cut a little bit more narrow to trim out that section there. So I'm just going to get rid of like this little piece here. And really in the grand scheme of things, that's a narrow little strip. So that won't really matter that much. So that's going to cut just a little bit more narrow there. Okay. So now I'm going to demonstrate how I would cut that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just cut flat right down the middle. Like I said, I'm just cutting it wide open. So it's like I would go across the bottom of the foot. Now I'm going to go up the toe and then up the top of the foot, if that makes sense. So I'm just snipping along here, turning it as I go. Okay. And then the little cheat that I'm going to do to cope with this brand name piece here is I'm just going to give it a little bit more of a snip on this side. Like I said, it's a very narrow little piece here, so it won't really matter that much. And any little edge piece that might show up is just going to get caught in our seam anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. Just don't want it to be obvious that this was an athletic sock when we're finished. So that's what that looks like trimmed. So as you can see side by side, that's the one I trimmed that no longer has a piece of the name, and then that's the one I have left to trim, so I'm going to do that one next. And so I will do the same thing with this one so that we have two pieces of each sock. So now I'm going to do like I did with my leg and arm pieces, and I'm going to cut it out, and then I'm going to use a whip stitch to put it together. So I'm just going to carefully cut on my little sketch line here. Just need to move my pin there. And I'm right-handed, so I'm going to just turn this upside down and have a look at it, make sure it looks pretty symmetrical. I can always trim it a little more, so it's better to cut less and then cut some more later than to cut it really big in the first place and then realize you cut too much. So take your time with it, shape it like you want it. Give it a little trim until you're satisfied with it. So I think that one looks pretty good. It's fairly ear-shaped. So now I'm going to cut this one the same way. And just got to move my pin out of the way. And then two, cut this side. And this is where I like to kind of compare them and make sure they look about the same. And it looks like this second one I cut needs a little bit more trimming. So I'm going to give that one a little bit more of a cut. Looks a little better. I'm going to trim this side, so I'm happy with that. Okay. So then if I check my work, I can kind of lay them on top of each other, make sure they're about the same, double check that I don't need to do any more trimming. And I'm I'm pretty satisfied with how that looks. Like I said, it's going to be a little tricky with the gray bit because it's going to be smaller than my striped part. So I'm going to have to kind of work with that a little bit as I sew. And so I'm not going to belabor the point with showing you how to sew them together since I just demonstrated that with the arms and legs, but you're going to use the same technique. You're going to use your whip stitch and go all the way around, but don't sew the end because this is how we're going to turn it right side out in just a moment. And then I'll show you what that looks like when it's finished. Okay, so now that we have cut our socks into two pieces, we're going to pair them up so that you have one of the men's sock and one of the athletic socks. So I have already done one of them here so you can see. And to do it like this, we are going to start by putting right sides together. So this is the outside and this is the outside. So I'm going to put them together. And to pair them up like I've shown you here, we're going to have to stretch out our little gray sock here a little bit to make it the right size. And that's going to give our ear a little bit of a cute three-dimensional shape once we're finished with it. So I'm just going to pin it so that it touches the edge here. And do the other side the same way, kind of stretching out the gray sock a little bit. As you can see, you kind of have to unroll it and give it a little tug, and it more or less stretches out like that. All right. And then our task from there is to sketch on our line here. And I played around with it a little bit on this one until I got it right, so I've decided that this is going to be the line that I follow. So you want a little bit of like a teardrop shape of sorts. So if I were to turn it like this, it looks kind of like a teardrop. And you want to give yourself enough space at the bottom that you can turn it. So this time I'm going to use my marker just because I have a lighter color here I can show you with. And so I'm just going to kind of sketch on what I want to do here. And again, it's going to be hard to draw on this sort of stretchy fabric here. So just do your best. Kind of eyeball it, make sure it looks like the other one. We're just going to kind of play around with it. This is one of those measure twice, cut once situations. So if you draw one, you're not super happy with it, it's okay, sketch again. It's not final till we cut it. So just about like this. So it's going to be all the way around the top part, and then it's just going to get narrowed down here at the bottom. And so it might be helpful to turn them like this so you can look at them like ears, because we're going to make them floppy ears for our bunny. Make sure that they look like you want. And if that looks good, we're ready for the next step. So now we're ready to tackle the body piece, and this is where it's going to start to look a little bit more like a stuffed animal. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to trim up this little spot here so that it's even. This is going to be the bottom of the body where the legs are going to attach. So I'm just going to cut it across to make it nice and even, make it easier to put together. Okay, so this is the part where we're going to put in our facial features. And so to start with, I want to arrange it so that the middle of my sock is down the back of my bunny's head. You can see on my sock that that's where the stripes connect to each other. So you don't want that to be the front of our face because that would show. So we're going to flip it over. This is going to be the front of our face here. You're going to imagine that the seam right here kind of goes right across Bunny's forehead. So you want to arrange it. So we don't want it way up at the top here because that's going to give our bunny a weird shaped face. We want to kind of arrange it almost like we would put it on, except being sure that our seam is right in the middle. Okay, so now to get an idea of how our head is going to be shaped here, I recommend giving it a little test stuff and marking where your eyes and your ears go. So grab a little bit of your fiberfill, kind of imagine that you're stuffing it like a head. So Bunny is going to have a little bit more of a round head, and then we'll fill in the body part down here. And again, this is for marking purposes. We're going to take this stuffing back out here in a moment. It's for the purpose of making sure we put our eyes and our nose in the right place. So kind of guessing there. We're going to kind of form it like a head would be. It's good to stuff it more or less as tight as you would in your final product so that you can see how it's going to turn out in the end. Okay. And so you just got to kind of work with your fiberfill. And again, we'll close up this bottom in our real project once we get this part finished. So we are just trying to create a head right now. Okay. So more or less that's going to be my bunny's head right here-ish, if that makes sense. Kind of like to the bottom of this light blue stripe here. So if I kind of look at the eyes and my nose, I can kind of figure out where I would want them to go. It looks sort of silly to start with because we don't have the rest of our face in, but it's good to kind of just guess where we want them to go. Maybe place my nose and then place my eyes, kind of figure out what distance I want them to be. And then of course our bunny's going to have a little mouth that goes under the nose, and so kind of eyeballing that. Alright, so I'm going to start by first marking where I want my nose to be, because I think that's a good anchoring place. And so on my bunny, I'm going to put it right here at the top of this blue stripe. So I'm just going to take my chalk and I'm just going to mark a little spot right there best I can. It might not show up very well on my video, but I can see that on my desk here. So that's where I'm going to put my nose, like this. The other way you could do it is if you wanted to maybe put a pin right there. If that helps you, you could even do 2 pins, kind of an X marks the spot like this, if that's helpful, as long as you know where a good place would be. All right. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just kind of figure out where I want my eyes to be. And I want them to stick a little bit out on my bunny. I don't want them facing close together and forward. That looks kind of strange. So a little bit out like this. And so kind of playing around with it. I think about 2 inches apart on my bunny is what I like. So I'm going to do that. So I'll mark 1. Again, I'm just going to give it a good mark. And then just check again. Yep, that seems like a good spot. So then I'm going to give it a good mark over here. All right, here we go. So more or less, this is where my eyes are going to go, and that's where my nose is going to go. Hopefully that shows up. And then the next step will be to install the safety eyes. So we do that before we finalize the project because we have to be able to reach into the inside of the doll. So that'll be our next step here. So I'm going to begin by taking out the stuffing I just put in. We'll set that aside. We'll get that put back in just a moment. So I think it's helpful to do the nose first since it's kind of right in the middle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab both pieces. So when I put this on, it's important to get it like I want it in the first try because it can't be removed. That's the whole point of a safety nose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in like this into my fabric, and you'll see here that your washer has a curved side like this, and then a flat side that lays down on my table. So I'll hold that here so you can see it. There's the flat side over here, and then the curved side. So when I install this, I want to pop it on like this, so that the flat side is on the underside of my project and flush with the back of this. You also want to be careful not to pinch it too far in, or it can cause the nose to be indented, unless that's your goal, in which case it's fine. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to take my embroidery scissors. I'm going to find that little spot that I marked, and I'm going to snip a tiny, tiny piece just where I want that nose to go, just a teeny little snip. It's important not to cut too big of a hole because it's going to stretch out. As you can see, one little snip, and that's plenty big. If it's too big, it will tear right through, and we don't want that. Okay, so one additional tip for doing your eyes to make sure that your hole doesn't stretch too much is to reinforce it with a few stitches before you put in your safety eye. So I have reinforced one of the eye holes and not the other, just to demonstrate the difference. So I did my very small hole, but because this is so stretchy, it's going to stretch out quite a bit. So I reinforced this hole so that when I pull on it, it really doesn't stretch the hole much bigger. And that gives enough reinforcement for the safety eye to hang on to when we snap on the washer. Versus this side that hasn't been reinforced, it's the same size hole, but as you can see, it just stretches. So to reinforce this hole, I am going to grab my needle with my double thread, just like I've been doing throughout the project. I'm going to make sure I anchor it through the two threads like this to make sure I catch that, and it's going to be really secure. I'm going to go ahead and trim that little piece of tail there because it's going to be in the way. And then what I'm going to do is literally just go around the hole, and I'm going to make little knots just to secure it. So I'm going to do almost like a whip stitch and then loop it. Same here. Just catch that loop. Basically, we're keeping it from stretching any further than just having the opening. We're taking out the elastic part of the hole. And this will make sure it doesn't stretch too much for the safety eye to grab a hold of. It's also good to check that your hole ends up small enough, because if for some reason you snipped it a little more than you meant to, this is a good opportunity to resize it a little bit, just to be sure that your safety eye is going to stay put and it's not going to pop out, because that is the whole goal of our safety eye. So I'm just going around. I'm not actually going to mend the hole shut because that's not the goal here. We do want to have a hole. We just want it to be small and we don't want it to stretch too much. So we're going to take out some of its elastic properties by doing this. Alright, and I've gone all the way around my hole here just about. And before I tie it off for sure, I'm going to grab my safety eye and give it a test run to see if I've tightened it enough. Oh, let's go just a little bit further. Looks like I missed a spot here. All right. So now I'm going to grab my safety eye and just give it a test go, see how it looks before I tie it off. So when I put my safety eye on there, I'm going to give it a stretch and make sure it's not going to go so far open that the back wouldn't catch it. I can see it's not quite tight enough, so I'm just going to go around a couple more stitches and be sure but it's really secure. So continue to tighten it up. Like I said, once we get these safety eyes and noses in here, that's it. They're going to stay put. So we can't really adjust them after the fact. It's important to make sure we have it like we want it from the jump. This is going to be less of a problem with your safety nose because of the shape of the nose. So that sort of triangular shape resists poking through, but unfortunately, because our eyes are round, they're going to be more prone to trying to poke through. So we just have to be thoughtful about that as we're constructing our project here. Make sure our little bunny is going to be safe to play with. Okay. That's looking better. Just going to give it a couple more stitches for security and double check what I've got. All right, so let's put that little guy in there again. See how it works. All right, so as I can see, even when I pull on it, it doesn't stretch so much. I'm going to turn it sideways so you can see. It doesn't pull over the edge of the eye, which is great. That means that my washer is going to hold it. And so now I'm ready to attach that on there. So I'm just going to tie this off and cut my string. And then I'll be ready to apply my safety eyes just like I did my safety nose. All right, and I'll show you what it looks like once they're applied. Okay, so now we have all of our pieces made, and we're ready to turn them right side out and start stuffing. So just take your pieces and turn them right way out. Being sure to pull all the way to the seam so that you can get them as round as possible. This is a good way too to check that your seam is tight enough for stuffing. So if you notice that you have any gaps in your seams, turn them back wrong side out and tighten those up a little, because we're getting ready to put our stuffing in there and we don't want it to poke out. Fortunately, it's going to be pretty easy to stuff because we have such stretchy socks here. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to turn these right side out. Like that. Like that. And then our ears. For the ears, I would put your finger all the way in them like this so you can grab them and turn them like that, because it is a narrow little spot where you are turning them there. So now you can kind of see what I meant by when we turn them right side out. They're going to sort of take a little bit of a curved shape, and that's exactly what we want. So that's cool. And again, we're going to put our thumb kind of down in the ear like this and grab it like that, and then flip it around and pull. So that's how we're going to turn it right side out. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is some stuffing. So grab that piece of fiber fill that you had when you were testing out your bunny face and give it a stuff. Now, it's going to take more fiber fill than you think, so be generous with it. You want it pretty stuffed so that you don't have any lumps and bumps. That's the trick to doll making in general, is you're going to use more fluff than you think. All right. That's also a good way to kind of shape your bunny's face right there. Give her a nice round head, right? Adjusting your eyes so they sink into the fiber fill. Good. Okay. So just keep grabbing pieces of fluff like this. Give it a stuff. And again, once we have it assembled, our head is going to be a little bit round like this, and then our body is going to come together like that. So she's going to have a little bit of a torso. So kind of get your fiber fill to do that. Okay. And then when you go to do the long skinny tubes of the arms and legs, I recommend getting like a chopstick or something, like a pencil you could use. This is just a plastic chopstick. You're going to want to do it in pretty small pieces, kind of roll it up and put it. And then that chopstick comes in handy. Kind of take the blunt end of it like this and get it all the way down there to the end. So that's the task here. So we are going to do the arms and legs. We are not going to stuff the ears though, so leave those empty. Always have them right side out. We'll also use just a little bit of fluff in our tail, but we'll do that in just a moment. So I'll show you what it looks like once I have all these pieces stuffed. All right, as you can see, I have finished stuffing the parts that I'm going to stuff for now, which are the legs and arms and body. We will not be stuffing the ears. We want those to be floppy, and we'll add our stuffing to our tail here in a moment. A note about stuffing. So I made sure that I kind of squeezed the legs as I went to make sure that they were evenly stuffed. I don't want any lumps and bumps in there. Another thing to note is that I decided I wanted my arms and legs to be pretty squeezable. You know, I want a really plushy bunny in my case. If you want your sock bunny to be a little floppier, it's just a different look. Just give them a little less stuffing. Have them be not as thick. You could just have them be more flat. And then that will have floppy arms and legs. All right. So we're going to start by attaching our legs. We'll probably give the body a little more stuffing here once we get her put together, but we want to just see how that looks. So we're going to put our legs on like this so that when we sew them on, they will have our seams tucked in like that. The trick to this is to roll your seam like this so we don't have any little end pieces of our leg part sticking out like that. And then we want to position it where we think it goes on the bunny like this. And we're going to safety pin it so that we can look at it and see how we feel about it. That way, if we're not quite happy with our placement, we can always adjust and repin it. All right. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Again, just kind of looking at it, making sure it's even. Grab that safety pin and put that on there. It's a little difficult when she wants to roll around like that, but there we go. We'll pin it. All right. So then we can turn it like it's going to look and see how we feel about that leg placement. This bunny is designed so that she could sit on the edge of a table if she wanted to, and hopefully she'll sit upright, especially once her arms are there to help her balance. So we're going to have it so that the legs will bend here at the bottom of the body. So if that looks satisfactory, and I think it does for my bunny, I'm going to be ready to attach it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to attach the rolled hem of the leg to the raw edge of the body like this. And I'm going to leave my safety pin right on there while I sew it, just for some security. I have my double thread ready to go. And I'm just going to whip stitch this on here. trim my threads, make sure that looks good. Yep. And so I'll turn it right side out to make sure that looks like it's pretty good, and it is. And so when we take our safety pin out, it's kind of adding a little bulk that's unnecessary now. You'll see that that leg is secure on there, and then here in a moment when we close up that body, this little tuck will be inside and we won't see it. So the goal will be that this is sort of the hip joint, if you will, of our bunny. So I'm just going to attach the other side, and then we'll do the next step. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is close the body of the bunny so that we can attach the rest of its parts more easily. So what we're going to do is a ladder stitch to close the bottom of the body. And to do that, the first thing that we're going to do is make sure that we anchor our stitch really well in a nice beginner spot like this. So remember, to do that, we're going to run our thread through the two threads there, making sure that it catches a whole loop so it won't go anywhere. Okay, so to do a ladder stitch, we're basically going to be sewing it across, and then as we pull it, it'll pull together the two sides. Our sock here is going to want to roll outward rather than tucking in, so we're going to have to fight with that a little bit. That's the thing that makes this a difficult way to do it, but this is going to be the most secure way to keep all that stuffing in. So I'm just going to tap my stuffing down a little bit so that I have more of a lip here, and then once I get it a little bit more closed, I can make sure I have enough stuffing to my liking. So to get started, I'm going to kind of roll under this edge here, like I said, and the stripes really help me because I can see how much to roll under. So I'm aiming for this little white stripe here. So I'm going to first come out like this, and again, it's going to want to roll outward, so we're going to have to tell it to roll inward like this. Okay, and then I'm going to kind of hold it together as if it's going to close like this, so I can kind of see how it'll come together. And then I'm going to take my next stitch and run it in through this little tunnel I've created here. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. The tricky thing is about our legs is that we're going to have to go through the leg. This is why we have a doll needle. So we'll go through the leg like this. And then we'll catch our little tunnel on this side. Hopefully you can see that. Let me zoom in a little bit. Like this, okay? All right, and then we're going to go back through our leg like this to the other side, like that. And then we're going to make sure it's rolled. And we're going to run it through a little section of this side. Like that. And as you can see, as I start to pull, it's going to start to close up that side. See, it's coming together right there. So I've put a couple of stitches. Now, with this little end piece here, it looks like part of my rolled thing, edge of my leg here is starting to poke out a little bit. I have my chopstick here from where I was stuffing it, so I'm going to just tuck it in there, and I will place another stitch in that section just to make sure that it stays tucked in. So you're essentially going to go back and forth, and I'm going to make my way back over to that side to make sure I've secured my corner well enough. So I get it through the little tunnel. I poke through the leg like this to the other side. I go back through the tunnel. And I go back through the leg like this. And back through the tunnel. So again, I'm just reinforcing this corner because it looks like I didn't catch it quite well enough the first pass. So I just went back through and gave it a couple extra stitches. Security is the main thing. If it looks like it worked out the first time, you don't have any end pieces poking out, then you can just carry on like you started. Thought it was important to show you that little hiccup because that might happen in yours. And so as you can see, that's looking a lot better. Just gonna give it a couple more stitches. All the way into this end here. And now I'm feeling like that's more securely attached. If I look at it, it's not poking out anymore. It's not coming loose. So I'm gonna just ladder back the way I started, going to the left, and pick up where I left off. I just gave it a little bit extra stitching for reinforcement. It never hurts to have extra when you're doing plushies like this. Okay, so I'm just going to ladder back in the other direction for security. Again, just kind of poking through the leg there. That. And then through here. And again, just continue to roll that under as you go. I've tried to do this where I pin it first, and the pins don't like to stay put because of the pliability of our fabric here. It's just too stretchy. They wiggle all around. You put yourself at risk of poking yourself. I just find it's not very helpful to pin it ahead of time. With a plushie like this, you're going to kind of adjust as you go anyway. So I think it's fine to just hold it together as you go. As you can see, I've just about caught up to where I left off in the first place. And it continues to come together. A little bit of a knot there. Just watch for that as you go too, that your threads are coming through all the way, especially with a double thread like this. Sometimes you'll get a little tangle, and that's okay. Just watch that as you go. All right, so I'm going to continue to ladder across, and then when I get towards this side, I'm going to check that I have enough stuffing, because that's my last chance to put more in the body if I decide I want it. So I'm just going to keep stitching, and then I'll show you that step there. Okay, so I just wanted to pause for a moment in my stitching here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see. So I've made my ladder stitch all the way across one leg. And before I sew on, I've done kind of through the middle here. I'm to the left side here where I'm going to finish the second leg. So this is how it's coming together. As you can see, the end of this leg is now tucked in there. It's plush pretty much right to that joint. It's going to sit nicely. So this is where I assess how much stuffing I've put. And as you can see, I have pretty good stuffing on the head part. That looks pretty good. I think the body could use a little more plush though. So this is my last chance to put a little extra. So before I continue my ladder stitch all the way across, I'm actually going to grab just a little more of my fiber fill. So this is why it's helpful to kind of check in on your stuffing amount while you're closing up your stuffy here, because you don't want them to be too flat looking. So this is a time you can kind of edit and see if it's coming together like you want. So yeah, I want my bunny to have a little more fluff here in the middle. Again, we don't want to stuff her so big that it's one big block, because we want it separated head and body like that. But I think a little bit more fluff would be fine. All right. So that's good there, probably. Let's see how we look. Yeah. And so now that I'm happy with my stuffing, I can sort of squeeze it and get it organized like I want a little better once it's closed. I don't want to do that too much because I'll push the stuffing back out. But I'm going to just continue to close up the other leg, and then I'll show you the next step from there. Okay, so now our body is closed, our legs are on, and I think the hardest part of our project is finished here. So as you can see, by adding a little more stuffing there, as I closed it up, it elongated the body a little bit, which is great. So now I just want to kind of, again, give it a good squeeze and twist, separate out that head a little bit so that there's a bit of a neck right here, if that makes sense. So just kind of forming the stuffy the way you want it. And then kind of bringing down some stuffing towards that seam that we just closed. So now that we have a closed seam, we have something to push it against, and that's helpful. All right, so now we're gonna put on our arms. And so to do that, first we're going to close our arms. So kind of like we did with our legs, except we don't have a seam to tuck them in this time. So we're gonna roll those closed and sew them, and then we will attach them. So we're going to do like this, where we kind of roll it once and then roll it again. So I'm going to do a double roll to make sure it's really securely closed. All right. Tuck in any little straggling pieces like that. And then I'm going to sew it closed. And so I'm going to grab, tuck it really good there. Okay. I'm going to grab both the piece of the roll and the side that I rolled it to get my needle started. And again, being sure that I grab that really securely at the beginning with a loop or two. We don't want our end piece to come out, because then our whole stitch will come undone. So that would be not good. A little bit of a knot there, no big deal. Okay. All right. Sometimes that little loop happens when you have a double thread like that. If it just won't come loose, give it another start. It's not worth the stress of fussing with it like that. So I'm just going to start over on that stitch. So if you ever get a loop like that and it just won't come out, tie it off the best you can. Just clip it and start over. It's not worth fighting with. Sometimes you just can't get those loops out. That is why with my ladder stitch, I kind of pulled it as I went. A lot of times when you see ladder stitches done, You will wait to pull it at the end, but I found it too aggravating to try to do that at the end with this particular project. So I'm just going to start that again. There we go. All right, that worked out nicer. All right, and now we're ready to roll. Okay, and again, I'm just going to give it an extra secure loop. Okay, after that little hiccup, there we go. All right, so the way that I'm going to do this to make sure it stays closed is I am going to grab, and zoom in so you can see. I'm going to grab the fold right here, and then I'm going to put it through to the other side, and then put it through this way, and then do it again. So again, that is, we're going to grab that little fold, send our needle through to the other side, and then back through here. Just making sure that your fold is about even all the way across. Again, we're grabbing that little tuck, then we're sending our needle through to the other side, go over just a little bit and send it back. So I'm going to just do this all the way across. That ensures that that is super closed. No stuffing is going to come out. It's just going to really anchor that fold like that. And because I'm using a thread that matches my project here, it won't show. It'll just blend right in with the sock, and that's great too. Making sure that our little end pieces there are tucked under. And then as I come to the end here, I will send it through, and I'm just going to whip stitch this little corner here because it looks like some stuffing is trying to come out a little bit. Just make sure that's super closed in there. I don't want that to come out. All right, there we go, and then I'll tie it off. So in the end, this is what our arm is going to look like. Zoom back out. Oops, wrong way. There we go. So in the end, we have our arm that has a little joint right here where we folded it, and then we have the, nice plush arm. So the next step will be to attach it. I'll go ahead and show you that with this arm. So it's a little bit easier to see where our arms go compared to our legs, and so they're just going to go right on the side there. Keep in mind that we've got our head and our neck here where we're going to tie our ribbon, and then this is where the body is. So on mine, it is right where this white stripe is, kind of. So I want to put my arms about where I think my bunny's shoulder would be, which would be about right here. I want to do it so that the edge that I sewed across is on the underneath side, and we're gonna safety pin it there, and then we can attach it with a whip stitch. So just gonna pin it on. Well, easier said than done sometimes with these plushies. There we go. So we just check that we're happy with that placement. It may be helpful to kind of see where our ears are going to go if you just want to kind of gauge what that's going to look like. So, yep, I think this is about where I like my arm. So, if I'm happy with that placement, I think I am, I'm going to go ahead and sew it on. So again, we're just going to use a whip stitch, making sure that we anchor it really well at the beginning. So I'll grab some of the body and some of the arm as I get started. Oops. And make sure I run through both threads like that. Get a good anchoring first stitch. There we go. All right. And I'm just going to leave my safety pin right on there because it's not going to be in my way, I don't think. And I'm just going to do a quick whip stitch just all the way down. Okay. And then just to be sure that this isn't giving me any help I don't need. Yep, that looks pretty secure. I'm going to give it just a couple more right here on the end to make sure it's securely attached and it's not going to come off. There we go. That looks better. And I'll tie it off. All right. So now I have one arm attached. And as you can see, now that we have it on, we can sort of rearrange our stuffing a little bit, make sure that that sits like we want. So I'm just going to attach the other arm, and then I'll show you how we do the ears. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is close up the ends of our ears before we attach them. And I've already done this one to show you what it's going to look like. So we want to maintain the teardrop shape as much as we can. So we're not going to fold them many times for this piece. So for this one, we're going to just tuck our ends in like this. Tuck our raw ends like that. Check that I have them about the same and they look pretty good. And then I'm just going to whip stitch them together like this. All right. Oops. I chose to close it this way because this piece isn't stuffed like the other ones, so it doesn't have to have quite as secure of a closure. It's fine just to tuck it in and whip it closed. All right. All right. That looks pretty secure. So now the contrasting sock here is going to be the inside of the ear, and then this is going to be the outside. So the next step is to position our ears. We'll use our safety pins to do that. Let's find to clip any stray threads you see there as well. Okay, so we want our ears to look the same on each side. So again, we're just going to play with the position of them, make sure we put them even on each side. For mine, I like them about right here. It's a little bit hard to show flat, but that's where my bunny ears are going to go. So I'm just going to hold them in place and safety pin them, make sure I like that before I start sewing. And let's see here. Yep. And that looks pretty good on my bunny here. So now I'm just going to sew them on again with a whip stitch like we've done our arms and legs, or our arms a moment ago. So again, going through the ear and the head right there, making sure I anchor that first stitch really well. And the safety pin can just stay put while we get this in here. All right. Now I'll take my safety pin out. And that's what an ear looks like attached on the top. That's what it looks like on the bunny. So I'm just going to attach the other ear, and then I'll show you how to do the tail. So now we want to make our tail with this little heel piece that we saved. And so we're going to turn this right side out like this. And the first thing we're going to do is trim it just a little bit. So we want to have it sort of half moon shape. These pieces are a little bit too long here. So I'm just going to take my scissors, going to kind of make sure it's even. Snip it like that, like that. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is take our thread, and I'm going to stitch together this side right here, making sure to anchor my thread. All right. And I'm going to just tuck it under like that, just like I did with my ear just a moment ago. And I'm going to whip it together. Like this. And then I'm just going to whip the other side together. And now you see when I've whip stitched both sides, I have a little bit of a pocket here. And so what we're going to do with this little pocket is put a little piece of fiber fill in there. So pinch off a little section, take about that much. It might be a little bit too much. Let's see. And we're going to put it in our little tail here. We want it stuffed pretty tightly so that it's a nice firm little bunny tail. So just kind of play it by ear, see how much fluff you feel like you need. That looks like about the right amount for my bunny tail. And then we're going to take our thread and we're going to do a simple running stitch all the way around. And so I'm just going to do a running stitch all the way around my circle here. So I'll just go in, out. Just keep it kind of loose because in a moment we're going to tighten it and you'll see how it gathers up our tail. Like this. All right, so I've made it all the way around my circle, and now I want to gently pull my strings so that it'll gather together. Pull gently so you don't break your thread, of course. Kind of tucking it so it'll become round. And like that, we have our bunny tail. So I'm going to just tie this off and then I'll... So now I'm ready to attach it. I have tied it off. I made a couple of knots to make sure it's not going to come loose now. But I'm just going to leave my thread attached because I'm ready to attach it to the bunny. So we'll find a good spot for it. I'm not actually going to pin it this time because it's got so much fluff that's going to be hard to do. So what I'm going to do is just, with the thread still attached to my bunny tail here, run it through the body, and I'm just going to try to whip stitch it and grab little bits of the tail and just kind of go all the way around the tail. Like that. Don't worry too much about the fluff getting rearranged as you sew it, because you can always wiggle it around once you're done. You're going to have to squish your tail a little bit to get it attached, and that's okay. All right. So I'm just going to go all the way around the tail, and then I'll show you what we do next. So now I'm going to sketch on my little bunny's mouth here with my embroidery thread. You're welcome to draw that on ahead of time if you like, but I don't find that necessary because I can sketch it more easily where I can see it with this pink. So using all 6 strands of my embroidery thread, I'm going to make a square knot on the top. All right, so I'm going to just tie a knot. Oops, there we go. Okay, tie knot. And for security, I'm just going to double knot it to be sure it stays put. Okay. Trim that little extra bit. And then I'm going to just use a whip stitch to go right down the middle. And this is where you want to watch your stitches and make sure they're really even, because this is going to show. Kind of checking your tautness as you go. And then when I get about here, I'm going to start to curve this way. Oops. And I tied my thread there. And see, I've got sort of a curve. And then what I'm going to do is go back through and trace over my line by catching these loops where I did my whip stitch to create a solid line. I'm going to zoom in so you can see that a little better. So I'm going to go back through like this. Pulling it taut as I go. And this makes it look like a solid line. Okay. So I have my little bunny lip on one side. And now I'm going to just do my whip stitch on the other side to match, and then I'll go back through and catch my stitches like I did here. And now that I'm back in the middle, so I've gone up and then back, I'm just going to finish it by connecting this middle part. Again, just catching my stitches and whipping it here. doing this similarly as we would a whipped back stitch in embroidery, if you do any of that. All right, and then checking out my line, I'm mostly pleased with it. I'm going to give it one more pass just to go over it to make sure I like how solid it is. So again, I'm just going to catch those stitches. I'm going to just go back over it to make sure my line is solid enough. Really just whipping it into the stitch line, not actually catching the sock itself. Now here's an embroidery trick we're going to do is we're going to put our needle into our project and come back out where we want to pick up next time. So we'll just whoop like that, and then that'll allow us to whip this side as well. And that looks more satisfactory. So just going to carry it back to where I started. And checking my work, I'm pretty pleased with how my mouth looks now. So I'm just going to tie it off right down here at the bottom. Because we have a nice thick section there at the bottom of the lip, then that is going to be the easiest place to tie our knot, just like we did at the beginning. Now we're just going to do a couple of finishing touches on our bunny. As we can see, she's mostly done at this point. So to complete our look here, I'm going to tie a little bow around her neck. This will also help keep the definition between the head and the body a little bit. So my piece looks a little long here. I'm just going to trim it. Just going to tie a nice little bow just above the shoulders there. Just for decoration. All right. And then the last thing I'm going to do is tack down my ears, because you could leave them like this if you just want them to flop, but I think it's cute to have them like this, tacked on the back. So that's going to be the last step that I do here. So to do that, we just need a little bit more of our same colored thread that we used throughout the project. We're going to turn our bunny over on the other side, and we would want to make sure that we do this step after we've put the ribbon on, because it would be awfully hard to tie it once the ears are tacked down. So we're just going to literally put a little tack right about here on the tip of our bunny. Just make sure that's the look I want. It is. Okay. So we're going to just anchor it here. All right. And then we're just going to grab the underside of our ear like this. And pull it all the way to the body. And we'll just do a couple more stitches like that for security. And then we'll just tie a knot. Just kind of arrange our ear like we like it. And then we'll do the other side. And there you have it. Our bunny is complete. As you can see, we are ready for springtime with this cute little plushie. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Suffolk Sewing Circle, and we look forward to seeing you next time.